Well, we covered earlier today how a federal judge blocked Biden administration officials from telling the federal government to influence social media companies. Here's what the New York Times had to say about that. One headline read, GOP threatens spy agency's surveillance tool. Yes, it actually said that. The subhead reading, with hard right Republicans attacking federal law enforcement agencies and unwilling to extend their broad powers, a major warrantless surveillance program targeting foreigners overseas may face new limits from Congress. Oh, no, not that. Here's some more reactions. This one was from CNN.
Here's what really is astonishing to me. This is a conservative ideology that clearly comes through in this decision. It's a conservative political ideology, right? We saw some of the quotes questioning vaccines, questioning masks, conservative talking points. But the ruling itself is the opposite of judicial conservatism. This is one of the most aggressive, far-reaching rulings you'll ever see. What this judge is purporting to do is to micromanage, really, the day-to-day interactions between essentially the entire executive branch, all these agencies that are listed as defendants, and the leading social media companies. And in the actual temporary injunction, the judge basically says, you're not allowed, administration, to talk to these social media companies about any protected free speech except for cybersecurity threats, national security threats, criminal threats. But where's the line? Who's going to police this? This is a judge trying to micromanage the day-to-day regular activities of the entire executive branch. I don't know that it's actually policeable by the judge, but it's really an astonishing. I don't mean this necessarily as a criticism. This is a very activist judicial opinion.
Sarah, I think Ellie gets to the point that
Then, of course, there was also this reaction on MSNBC. Let's play it.
I think that, you have to take a step back and acknowledge what the reality is about how the FBI has been interacting with this. And just look at January 6th itself, for example, right? It's not as though the FBI has been going in and saying, hey, take down this post, hey, take down this post. That's what they're alleging, but there's just not a lot of evidence to support that. And basically, we've had a situation where some politicians are making any contact between social media companies and the FBI or law enforcement seem problematic in some way. And if you look at the reality, it's like the FBI is not very good at monitoring social media. Just look at what happened on January 6th. There are all of these warning signs, red flags going up all over the place, and they weren't prepared. They didn't do enough. They did not take proper precautions or instruct other law enforcement agencies to make proper precautions. So I think that that's the framework you have to remember that this is important to look by. I mean, this opinion, this 155-page opinion, starts off with essentially a big if true comment. It says, okay, if these things are true, this is one of the biggest First Amendment abuses in American history. And I suppose so, if it were true, but that's not necessarily where the facts are lining up with and what exactly the evidence shows that social media companies, how they were interacting with at least the FBI.
Danny, I wonder.
I mean, there are a lot of people just sticking their head in the sand here. There was pervasive evidence of direct contact between the FBI and other agencies asking for content takedowns on matters that were political parodies about the election and other things. Obviously, we famously have tons of former law enforcement top national security officials saying that the laptop is misinformation, and then there's so much again, they're just claiming these things don't exist. And then it's not just the FBI. I don't mean to just pick on them. It's the CDC. It's the agency. Again, how do you get around? This is an email from Rob Flaherty, deputy assistant to the president, President Joe Biden, that says on this parody account linked to Finnegan Biden, Hunter Biden's daughter, President Biden's granddaughter. It says, cannot stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. Please remove this count immediately. It was suspended 45 minutes later.
Yeah, I mean, so there's been so much reporting on this. It feels ridiculous to have to go back through this again. But it does show what information vacuums the people who are regularly invited on MSNBC are in. This from The Intercept. Ken Clemenstein and Li Fang wrote a piece last October about the Department of Homeland Security's plans to grow this disinformation governance board. Some email correspondence showed discussions along these lines. Quote, platforms have got to get comfortable with government. It's really interesting how hesitant they remain. Microsoft executive Matt Masterson, a former DHS official, texted Jen Easterly, a DHS director, back in February. Obviously the effort to grow this now shuttered disinformation governance board. DHS had plans to target inaccurate information on the origins of COVID-19 pandemic and the efficacy of vaccines, racial justice, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of U.S. support to Ukraine. Meaning, if you have views about those subjects, there was a concerted plan to address them through pressuring social media companies. Facebook created a special portal for DHS and government partners to report disinformation directly, establishing a particular relationship between the social media companies and these government agencies that allowed them to jump the line and not just generally make complaints the way that any of us can, but privileging their concerns over the concerns of others that might cut in a different direction of the U.S. government. This has been well reported at this point, including by non-right media, like liberal or left-leaning institutions like The Intercept. That Jacobin wrote a piece about why the Twitter files are so important.
It's not big if true. It's true.
It's true.
It's true. Sorry. And look, I take the point that it feels like micromanaging because here's a list of things they can still do. Here's a list of things they can't do. The overlap seems a little bit tricky to draw the line on. I don't know that this judge specifically is, again, the right authority to decide exactly.
Sure.
And he won't be the final authority. There will be other judges who will look at this. And then eventually, I hope Congress does, in fact, take on the task of, you call it micromanaging, but these are government employees. They work for the people. They're federal employees. It is appropriate for the agencies that oversee them and Congress ultimately, which oversees them, to engage in place some checks on how they are pressuring free individual entities to censor speech. That is entirely appropriate to do. That guest in the CNN clip is casting that as an activist conservative project. No, I'm sorry, it's not. The court the court has taken in the same way that if the court had letting anti-war protesters, do something contrary to what the administration wants. I guess that's micromanaging their speech rights, but that's what the court does.
I definitely do think this is politicized. I don't think the politics of the judge are irrelevant here in coming to this conclusion. And I don't think the appetite that many conservatives have had for this particular story is unrelated to the politics underlying it. But something can be both political and politicized and also true and worthwhile. And part of why it is able to be so effectively politicized by the right is because liberals, Democrats, have shown no interest in making this issue their own, and it very much could have been. Instead of Stacey Plaskett haranguing Matt Taibbi and threatening him with jail time during those Twitter files, she could have pressed him on what kind of government interference was undermining the interests that she shares, the interests of the left, something that did in fact exist. People forget that the main criticism of Twitter under Jack Dorsey was from left-leaning activists who were concerned that their posts were being taken down and censored, while people who said bigoted things, used racial epithets, said transphobic things, etc., did not have their posts taken down. There was the reporting by The Intercept about the kind of fake accounts that these intelligence agencies were creating on Twitter that were fake Arabic-speaking accounts that were like, yes, we love U.S. interventionism in our country, trying to do this kind of false flag work.
The famous list of inauthentic Russian accounts that quasi-pseudo government nonprofit had that was fake, that was real Americans expressing their actual beliefs.
And Matt Taibbi, told me in an interview that he did on my show that he never did any specific searches for any of the kind of Bernie bro stuff that was happening. He was claimed to be a Russian agent. Russia was working for him after he won Nevada. He didn't do any specific searches along that timeline or on that issue, but that's something that I would have loved to have seen the left pushing instead of just trying to pretend that this was a non-issue and wasn't a concern that was germane to everyone. Moreover, I'm looking at this Jacobin article. I had forgotten about this, that the FBI pressured Twitter to relax its privacy standards and hand over more user information. It asked executives if they would revise their terms of service to effectively allow intelligence agencies to scoop up open source data more easily. They said no, to their credit. And if they'd share information about accounts using VPNs, which are used to mask online activity. That is a broad.
Oh, big if true. It's true. It's true. We know it's true.
Right. So credit to the social media companies for pushing back against something like that. But it is absolutely a broad public concern. I will say one thing I do agree with that commentator on MSNBC about is that it is very subjective, and it's unclear how any of this will be policed. So, I mean, I think, as I said in an earlier segment, transparency would be really important here. But you can say in an injunction, you can say in a court order that the government shouldn't do X, Y, Z, but it does still have power to do ABC, which it says. But what is the difference between ABC and X, Y, Z? Those are subjective judgments that these agencies are going to continue to make. And without a Twitter files, without something that is forcing transparency, it's unclear whether we'll ever know if they're making decisions in a way that we feel like respects the civil liberties of users of these platforms.
We're just at the start of the project for figuring out how to deal with this, but there is so many egregious calls for censorship from officials in the administration, the FBI, the CDC, and others. Many of them are quoted in this document, so I don't know how anyone in the mainstream establishment can pretend that there was nothing to see here. Again,
right.
you could disagree with the strategies. You could be concerned that, well, I don't want to hamstring them too much because what about crime? What about terrorism? But that's not what they're doing. They're just waving away that they're pretending, which then makes it true. They're pretending this is only something, you have to be a crazy right-wing person to care about this, which then they're making that the reality.
Also, terrorism, election interference, crime, these were the justifications that were being used for a lot of the censorship decisions that they had to reverse. Trump was removed from the platform because of January 6th. I mean, that's crime. That's election interference. The Hunter Biden stuff was taken down ostensibly because they had laid the foundation of so much skepticism that there was going to be election interference, that by the time the Hunter Biden laptop came, they didn't need much in the way of pressure to say, like, oh, we should take this down because it's going to negatively affect the election the same way that the email stuff did in 2016 or what have you. So the very context in which the court is saying that the government has latitude to operate in are what have been exploited to make, I think, anti-speech related decisions in the past.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we will absolutely continue following this. Tomorrow on Rising, we'll have more of the same, but newer.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who prefer to listen while you're on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.